Alright, well here it is, another day of fun and adventure, without the fun and half the adventure. Got the wife mobile here. This is my wife's 2009 Chrysler 300, and it's got a dead miss. So I plugged in my scan tool. If you haven't seen one of these, you can get these on Amazon, about 25 bucks. And you plug it in, you run the torque app on your phone, and it'll give you data stream, it'll tell you what the trouble codes are. And I've got a dead miss on the number one cylinder. Not the first time I've had a dead miss with this car. The wiring on these engines is very brittle. I've had to replace parts of the injector harnesses, but the number one's already been fixed, so I'm not sure what the issue is with it misfiring. I've got to pull this apart, and there's some unique stuff to this. So far, some of the things on this engine I like. I had to do the timing belt a couple of years ago, and timing belt on these is just dirt simple. But this intake manifold system, how it wraps over the top, to do anything with the number one bank, you've got to pull this intake manifold off. And there's an EGR tube in the back. That seal gets blown out real easy. And of course, every time you pull the intake manifold on and off, you mess with that seal. So I've got to dive in and see if I can figure out what's going on with it, why it's misfiring. I've got to replace that EGR seal. I've got a new one. So let's see what I get. So there's two nuts over here that with some links that go down. This holds this into the intake manifold down. Those are gone. I put them on last time and I tightened them up, but this hardware has been on and off this intake so many times that it's not hanging on like it's supposed to. So I may have to see about putting some block nuts on there whenever I put this back together. But you can see I zipped these off. I work from the outside in. I have one electrical connection down here I can't get loose. And basically I'm going to take from here all the way over there off this one piece. I've just got this one nut here to get. I've got to use a swivel it to get it. So I'm going to give you a little tool tip here in a second. I cut my teeth working on Japanese cars 25 years ago, and this is the fastest setup for most modern cars. You may need to invest in an 8mm instead of a 10 nowadays because things are getting smaller, but I've got a small 1/4-inch ratchet, and it's got like 100 and some odd teeth or something like that. This is a snap-on. This is a $50 ratchet just by itself, this little thing here, which I think is overpriced, but it works. There are other brands that are cheaper. I would search out those. This is a 10mm 1/4-inch drive impact socket. It's not a U-joint. It's got a swivel in here that it's not going to bind as it goes around. And you put it on a good extension that holds on to it. I've got a locking extension. The lock's wore out and it falls out of all these sockets. This regular style extension, and it's not even a brand name, I don't think. Oh, it's snap-on, but it's like a 50-year-old snap-on. It holds the sockets well. So that combination right there is the fastest hand tool for most modern cars. All right, the intake manifold gasket looks like butt. It's flat, and it doesn't look like it's sealing really well. So I may have to replace that before I go back together with this. But there's a notch, not a notch, but it looks kind of rough right there. I'm kind of wondering if maybe I've got a lean misfire on number one caused by that. But I'm gonna pull out the plug and see what I got. Now I've got these intake ports open at the moment, and I really don't want crap falling down in there. So when I was a Nissan dealer, we had little plastic cups that we could put in the intake manifolds of the VG motors. Because at the time we had a recall and we had to tear off the top end of the engine, the intake manifold and such, to replace some injector harnesses, whatnot. And I don't have anything for this, but I don't have any special tools for that. Well, I do have plenty of is rags. So I've got a bunch of old socks up there, and I'm going to stuff socks in those, keep stuff from falling in there, because you really don't want stuff getting down in your intake manifold while you're working on it. All those old socks you're missing out of your dryer, I have them. But seriously, we have the orphan sock box in our pantry, and whenever a sock doesn't have a match, it goes in the orphan sock box. And after about a year, if we haven't found the match, it gets put in the rag bin. All right, so I took out the number 1 and the number 3, and the number 1 doesn't look bad, but comparing it to the number 3, you can see it's got a fair amount of oil fouling, especially right there. What's going on there? So I suspect, looking at my intake manifold, there is a lot of oil. So I'm thinking, for one, this engine's got some blow-by. This engine's got 200 some odd thousand miles on it. It's got some wear and tear. So I think I've got blow-by in the crankcase, but this intake manifold gasket's not sealing really well anymore. So I need to get a new intake manifold gasket for it, and hopefully that'll fix it. So I'm going to see what I can find as far as intake manifold gaskets, get that replaced. That EGR tube seal, it's completely gone, which my wife was out of town about a year ago, and we got charged for there's a mechanic out of town that she went to, and he charged for replacing that seal. There's not one in here, so I don't know if he took the money and ran, or if the seal was just not that good. I don't know, but I got to get that fixed too. So anyways, let's see if I can get this back together. And we got to flog this car for another 50,000 miles probably. So I'm messing with the EGR valve, EGR tube a little bit. And it's got an awful lot of play for being really well sealed to the engine. And there's no, where it fits in down here, there's no screw in socket. Basically it goes down and there's a flange that bolts it down, and it's still loose. So I'm really thinking that EGR tube is going to have to be replaced also to get this cleaned up. No end to it. So now I'm up to valve cover gaskets, EGR tube. I probably need to at least replace one spark plug, if not all, but the rest of the spark plugs are actually fairly new, so I'll probably just replace that one and call it good. Quick tip. As a rule, try not to set your tools on the vehicle you're working on. I've got my roll-around cart here. If you've got a roll-around cart, use it, set the tools there. I'm not always the best at that, I'm trying. As an H technician for the Air Force, one of the rules that didn't always get followed was don't set your tools on the equipment. And there's good reason for that, especially if you're dealing on stuff that goes on a flight line. If you forget and leave a tool in a piece of equipment, and it gets towed out to the flight line and it falls off onto the ramp, a jet engine can suck it up, and then you've just cost $10 million worth of damage by not policing your tools well enough. So I am trying to be good about it. So I'm going to work on cleaning my stuff off of here at the same time. And that's ugly. I think I'm getting an air filter also. Looks like I got quite the list for O'Reilly's this afternoon. But take the opportunity to police up your tools as you go. If you've got a big project going on, and it's going to be a while in the more than a couple days, at the end of the day, clean up your tools. And I started off with a full cart this morning because I didn't put up my tools last time. But I'm trying to be good about it and get my stuff taken care of, put up my tools. It makes you a more effective technician when you do that. All right, I went ahead and separated the air cleaner housing from the intake manifold so that I can work on this a little better. I'm gonna go ahead and pull this seal out here and get it ready to go. All right, so I'm looking up parts. Tried looking up an EGR tube for the Chrysler. I searched at O'Reilly's and they don't show it. I searched at Rock Auto and they show it for $87, but no description, nothing. So I ended up searching for Dorman 598171, which is the EGR tube for Chrysler 300, and Summit Racing has it for $113, and they don't have a description of it really. So, but when you're searching for parts, don't be afraid to Google them. I mean, if you can find a website that you know has the correct part for your vehicle, search for it elsewhere. I took the part number I got from Rock Auto and put it into O'Reilly's website. It didn't come up. O'Reilly's doesn't carry that part, but at least I can look for it. So don't be afraid to use Google, to use online searches to try to find your parts. And you'd be surprised how many times you can find the same parts at a cheaper price if you just look around. So, but that EGR tube looks like it's be $90 to $120. I'm not going to pay that for it. I'm going to pull that one off and see what I can see what's wrong with it, and I might be able to fix it. So, who knows? Okay, I'm in a rough spot with this EGR tube. I got the one side bolt out. It fell to the ground. I haven't got it yet. It's down there somewhere. The other bolt, I got about halfway out and it's stuck. And it's a very small bolt. Matter of fact, let me grab that other one real quick. You can see it's a very small bolt. If that one snaps off, I'm screwed. So what do you do when you go to take a bolt like this out in a hard to get place and it sticks? Well, you don't force it, that's for sure. I tried using the impact to put a little bit of a hit on it. A lot of times, a little bit of an impact is good. You can break stuff free and get stuff in and out. I know on the Mustang that I showed the other day, when I changed spark plugs on it, I waited too long to do the spark plugs on that. And they're really bad. The 3-valve 4.6 is really bad about the spark plugs breaking in two when you pull them out and leaving the tip inside the head. And there's a tool for extracting that and whatnot. But I talked to a Ford technician before I even started on it, and he said use an impact, back it out, and as soon as it binds up, run it back in, then back it out again, run it back in, and just work it until it finally comes out. And that's what I've got to do here. I've got to work that stuck bolt out of the back side of the cylinder head there, where the EGR valve is. So I've got a bigger ratchet on it, so it's easier on my hand, and I'm just going to run it in and run it back and run it in and run it back until it finally loosens up. I'll probably put some penetrant on it just to aid it a little bit in case of something gumming it up. A lot of times there's stuff in the threads, and once it gets gummed up, if you try to force it, you're going to stick it worse, and eventually you'll snap it off. Already I can tell, you know, the socket has tried to pop off a head twice now, and so that tells me the head is going to get rounded here real fast if I'm not careful. And if I can't get this out, my only option is to run it back in and just drive it forever with the EGR valve leaking, and I don't want that. I want this car to run good. So I'm going to get some penetrant on it, and I'm going to keep trying to get this out. Oh man, that'll make you feel like a superhero. I got it out, but it doesn't look pretty. Those threads are going to be bunged up, so I'm going to have to run a tap through that before I put a bolt back in there. And I don't know if I can clean these threads up enough to get this bolt back in. We'll see. EGR tube gasket's shot. You can actually see, I don't know if you can see the light through there, but it's, in fact, I got a light. So, it's holy. I don't know how well that showed up. The tube itself, I'm thinking the gasket being so loose, and there is a definite indentation there. That's why this is sliding around. So my EGR tube is good. It was missing this seal on this end, so I've got that. I have to get the gasket for the other end. I'm going to have to clean up that bolt, and then hopefully I can get this back together. And you know, my wife has been having EGR problems with it, and I kind of knew that. That's why I had the seal on hand. I've been intending to go in here for a while and replace the bunged up seal that doesn't actually exist. So it'd be nice to get back on the Jaggernaut or get back on Way Cool Jr. or Roscoe, or do some project other than fixing family members' cars. But this is part of it. You got to stay on top of your maintenance. You can't play around until you get the work done. So another quick tool tip here: if you do any fair amount of wrenching and you don't have a tap and die set, you need to get one. And the sad truth about tap and die sets is you just can't find good cheap ones. You have to spend a bit of coin and get a decent set. I have some cheap. This is a cheaper set. It's not a cheap set, but it's cheaper, and it's got some rough finishes on some of the parts, and sometimes it's not great. My standard tap and die set's much nicer. I think I paid about $90 for it, and that's about what you're gonna have to pay to get a good tap and die set. You find these $30, $40 ones, and you can tell they're straight off some factory and who knows where, and they had no cleaning work done on them. The castings are ill, and a lot of times the threads aren't clean, and they'll chew up the stuff you're trying to clean up, and then the metal's not good, and so it won't actually cut so much as just mar stuff up. So anyways, I got this bolt here. I got it chucked up. I've got the tap the die in the die holder, and I'm basically just using a socket to run it through, and we'll see if this gets the aluminum burrs off this. It looks like it's coming clean so far. Don't be afraid to use a little bit of lube. And you want some kind of cutting oil in there, and just work it nice and easy. If it hangs up, back it out and go in again. That went through on the first try, no problem, and the threads are looking clean. So I think this is a success. I'll be able to reuse this bolt, but I still have to run a tap through the threads and back. And that runs into another little thing here. My tap and die set here has a fitting for holding the taps, but you can see it doesn't have a socket attachment. This is out of an old tap and die set I have laying around. It's not even out of my good set. It's out of I think it was a Sears Craftsman set, but it's got the fitting for the 3/8 drive ratchet. And so I'm going to thread this down in the hole and use a 3/8 drive ratchet very carefully. I may put a 1/4" drive adapter on here and use a 1/4" drive ratchet to drive this into the hole and clean out those threads. So be creative, but also invest in a good tool, a good tap and die tool set. That is success. All right, I tried running my tap down through those bolt holes, and this is just too bulky to get in there and do it. It sticks up too high, it hits other stuff in there. I can't get a ratchet on it really well. So I resorted to taking the old bolt, the better of the two bolts, and just running it all the way down to the hole and all the way back out. And I started in the good hole, and that went fine, and so I went over to the bad hole, and if it had hung up at any point, I would have backed it out and use some compressed air or something to try to clean out the threads. But it went all the way down, all the way out. The threads that were stuck on that other bolt, I think were stuck there just from heat cycling, whatnot, weak threads maybe. but they came out with the bolt, and the threads that are left are good. So if it had come down to it, I have made a poor man's tap before. If you've got to clean out a bolt hole and you don't have a tap set handy, take a bolt of the same size, one that's expendable, and cut a groove down both sides of the threads, just as thin of a groove as you can. If you can do it with a hacksaw, that'd be great, but it's not practical. If you have like a Dremel with a cutoff wheel on it, you just put a little thin groove down each side between the threads. That gives the threads a sharp edge to catch and cut and clean stuff. And it also gives room for the debris to fall between the threads. And I've cleaned up a bolt hole before doing that. It's not the preferred way. If you can get a hold of a tap and die set, use a tap and die set. But you know, if you can't get your tap in there, another thing you can do, if you have a tap and die set and you can't get in there, you set a square back end. If you've got a 12-point socket small enough, you can chuck these up in a 12-point socket. It'll be a little wobbly, but you know, your main thing is to keep this nice and steady, get it in the hole, get it threaded in a few threads, and if your ratchet wobbles around, that's not such a problem, and it'll actually keep you from getting the tap offset, because the tap is going to follow the hole, and that'll allow you to thread it in and back out. I've done that before too. So, multiple avenues of getting around stuff. I'm ready for reassembly. I just got to get parts, but my wife's at work with my car. Way Cool Jr., I just pulled the dipstick on it, and I think I got a blown head gasket. I got milkshake in the oil. So it's been leaking oil. I think I'm going to have to pull the hinge back out of it and look and see what I did wrong. So until my wife gets home, I can't get parts to fix her car. One of those days. All right, so it's raining now. My wife got home with I placed an online order at O'Reilly's, and my wife got home with parts. And as she's walking up to me, I could see in her hand that the intake manifold gasket is completely wrong. So I had to drive back to O'Reilly's. There's an AutoZone a whole lot closer to me, but I go to O'Reilly's because typically they tend to hire people who have an interest in cars, and I get better service there. But I was really disappointed that I got the wrong part and had to go back. Got the right part now. It comes with the EGR seal that I needed but already had. So anyways, time to get this back on. But I wanted to talk real quick about professionalism and doing things right most of the time, because this really irks me. I used to work for a defense contractor in a warehouse, providing parts to the Navy, and I worked night shift. Day shift was busy, solid busy, but they would occasionally have issues, and they would pass, if they had an inventory issue, they would pass it down to us on night shift to research and try to find out what happened. And it would take, you know, if you had to go pull a part, if you got a part requisition, you'd go take your document, you'd go find the part, pull it, bag it, get it ready to go. It would take you about 3 or 4 minutes to do it. But whenever I got one of these issues handed to me, it was usually, hey, find out what's going on with this. And I'd have to go and see what actually is the problem here. What are we trying to find out? And so I'd have to research it. And then I'd find out what the issue was. And then I'd have to figure out what the person did wrong. And so I'd spend several minutes going through documents, looking in the bins, trying to find out, was the part in the wrong place? Did, you know, how did they screw this up? And then after that, I would have to actually resolve the issue and get the correct part. And then I'd have to let management know what happened. And there's 4 of us on nights, me, RJ, Wayne, Raymond, at different times, you know, we worked there and did that stuff. And it always took about 10 times as long to fix the problem as it did for the person to commit the problem in the first place. And most jobs I've seen, you know, if you cross-thread a bolt on an engine, it takes you 20 seconds to put a bolt in and cross-thread it and realize you screwed it up. How long does it take you to fix it? You're looking at probably about, 20 minutes, 10 to 20 minutes. It takes you 10 times as long to fix your mistakes as it does to do them. So if you do 90% of your job correctly, you're worthless to me. I've been a supervisor managing other people working, and The guys who pay attention to detail and do it right time after time, those guys are invaluable. That guy who's slamming tools and he makes mistakes, but he's going to get it right most of the time. I don't want him. I can't handle having to spend all my time chasing down somebody else's mistakes. And if they're messing up 10% of what they do, that's a whole other person's worth of work to fix what they've done wrong. You've got to be very careful in what you do. And this just, it took a guy all of 30 seconds to go pull the part and put it in the bag for my wife to bring home. It's a half-hour round trip for me to go to O'Reilly's. So be mindful of what you're doing. Do it right. But now it's time for me to get back to work on putting this back together. And sorry for the noise. It's pouring down rain. So I don't know if you noticed a second ago or not, but I put that spark plug in, pulled my spark plug socket back up, got the next plug ready to go, and the little rubber gasket in the bottom of my socket wasn't there. Attention to detail, while I looked in there, sure enough, it was still on the spark plug. Man, third tool tip of the day, don't you feel lucky? These are hemostats. These are what doctors use for doing surgery. Sometimes you can find these really long ones. This one's about 12 inches long. They've got a little clip on the end so that you can lock it in place. These are excellent retrieval tools. There we go. I went to put this toolbox away and I checked. It was shut. I opened it up and checked before I put it in the toolbox. Sure enough, I left one of the dies out. It's a habit I learned in the military. Always check your toolbox. So if you've watched for any length of time, you know I like to call out stupid engineering when I see it. And the EGR tube on this is absolutely stupid. It's got a press-in fit up here, but down there it bolts into the cylinder head. You can't reach it with the intake manifold on top. But you've got this piece here that's got to snap in place. And how are you going to snap it in place if if it's not loose? So I'm kind of frustrated by that. It's a really wonky way of doing this. And it's, it was done by an engineer who doesn't have to wrench on it. What does he care? All right, it's pouring down rain. I've got to pack up and go. It's my daughter's birthday today, so I've got to go to her birthday party. I just fired it up and it's running worse. Not sure what's going on here. I'm going to have to plug the tester back in and see what I get out of it, but that's not a project for today. So more to come.